Have you ever found yourself caught in the bewildering dance with someone who clearly cares for you, yet keeps you perpetually at arm's length? You see the love flickering in their eyes, feel the warmth in their fleeting touches, hear the tenderness buried beneath their carefully measured words, and yet there remains this invisible barrier, this emotional moat they've constructed around themselves. Today, we're going to explore precisely why your avoidant keeps you at arm's length, even when they love you. And I promise you, by the end of our journey together, you'll understand not just the mechanics of this maddening contradiction, but how to navigate it with both wisdom and compassion. You know, in my many decades of observing human nature, both on stage and off, I've come to realize that the most profound truths about love often lie not in what people do, but in what they don't do, not in what they say, but in what remains unspoken. The avoidant lover is perhaps the most misunderstood creature in the entire menagerie of human relationships. They're not cold, despite appearances. They're not unfeeling, though they may seem so. They're not incapable of love, although their actions might suggest otherwise. No, they're something far more complex and, dare I say, tragic. They're individuals caught in an internal war between their deepest longing and their most primal fear. This phenomenon has a name in psychological circles: approach-avoidance conflict. Imagine, if you will, a magnificent wild animal that has been wounded. It desperately needs care and nourishment, yet every instinct screams at it to flee from the very hands that offer healing. This is the daily existence of the avoidant partner. They're simultaneously drawn to the love you offer and terrified by its implications. But why? What creates this seemingly irrational response to the very thing most humans crave above all else? The answer lies deep in the neural pathways carved by early experience, in what psychologists call the negativity bias, and in defense mechanisms so deeply ingrained they operate below the threshold of conscious awareness. Your avoidant partner isn't choosing to hurt you any more than someone with a phobia chooses to fear spiders or heights. They're responding from a place of ancient programming, a survival system that once protected them but now imprisons them. What you'll discover in our time together today is not just the what of avoidant behavior, but the why behind it. We'll delve into the fascinating neuroscience of attachment, explore the hidden world of the avoidant mind, and most importantly, I'll share with you practical strategies for creating the kind of safe emotional environment where even the most guarded heart might dare to open. You'll learn how to recognize the subtle signs of their internal struggle, how to respond in ways that ease rather than trigger their defenses, and how to maintain your own emotional well-being while loving someone who seems determined to keep you at a distance. This isn't about changing them, mind you. That's neither possible nor advisable. Rather, it's about understanding them so completely that you can love them in the language they can actually hear, while simultaneously honoring your own needs for connection and intimacy. It's about transforming what feels like rejection into an opportunity for deeper compassion, and what seems like emotional stinginess into a recognition of just how precious their love truly is when they do manage to share it. Let me tell you about Margaret, a brilliant architect I knew some years ago. She had this peculiar habit of designing the most beautiful homes, each one a masterpiece of warmth and invitation. Yet her own flat was sparse, almost monastic in its simplicity. One evening, over a glass of rather good Burgundy, she confided something that stayed with me. "You know," she said, swirling the wine thoughtfully, "I spend my days creating spaces where other people can feel safe and loved, but I've never quite managed to do the same for myself." That, my friends, is the essence of the avoidant dilemma, distilled into a single heartbreaking admission. Margaret had grown up with parents who, while not deliberately cruel, were emotionally unavailable. Her father, a successful businessman, showed love through providing rather than presence. Her mother, overwhelmed by her own anxieties, oscillated between smothering attention and complete withdrawal. Young Margaret learned early that emotional needs were inconvenient, that vulnerability was dangerous, and that the safest path was self-reliance. She became a master at reading rooms, at anticipating what others needed, at being useful without being needy. When Margaret fell in love with David, a warm, expressive painter, the approach avoidance conflict nearly tore her apart. Here was this man who offered everything her heart had secretly yearned for: unconditional acceptance, emotional availability, genuine intimacy. Yet every fiber of her being screamed warnings. "This is dangerous," her nervous system would whisper. "This will end in disappointment. This will end in abandonment. This will end in pain." So she would move closer, drawn by the warmth, then retreat when the intensity became overwhelming. David, bless him, was initially bewildered. "She says she loves me," he would tell friends, "and I believe her. I can see it in her eyes, feel it when she thinks I'm not looking. But then she'll disappear for days, or change the subject when things get too deep, or find reasons why we can't spend too much time together." He was experiencing firsthand what psychologists call the avoidant paradox, the simultaneous expression and withdrawal of love. You see, Margaret's brain had been wired by her early experiences to view emotional closeness as a threat. The negativity bias, our brain's tendency to weight negative experiences more heavily than positive ones, had been amplified by her childhood learning. For every moment of connection with David, her unconscious mind would conjure 10 scenarios of potential loss. Her nervous system, designed to keep her safe, was actually sabotaging her happiness. The breakthrough came when Margaret began to understand her own patterns. She started to recognize the physical sensations that preceded her withdrawal, the tightness in her chest, the urge to flee, the sudden critical thoughts about David or their relationship. Instead of acting on these impulses immediately, she began to pause, to breathe, to remind herself that these were old feelings responding to a present situation. David, meanwhile, learned to read the subtle signs of Margaret's overwhelm. Instead of pursuing her when she withdrew, which only triggered her flight response further, he began to offer consistent, non-demanding presence. He would send brief, affectionate messages without expecting immediate responses. He would make plans but hold them lightly, understanding that Margaret's need for space wasn't rejection but self-preservation. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete. Margaret still struggles sometimes with the intensity of love, still occasionally retreats when emotions run high. But their relationship deepened into something beautiful and sustainable because both partners learned to work with, rather than against, the reality of avoidant attachment. Now, let me share with you the practical wisdom gleaned from stories like Margaret's, strategies that can help you love your avoidant partner more effectively while protecting your own emotional well-being. First, and perhaps most counterintuitively, you must learn to see their withdrawal not as rejection but as regulation. When your avoidant partner pulls back, they're not necessarily pulling away from you, they're managing their own emotional overwhelm. Think of it like someone stepping outside for fresh air in a crowded room. It's not that they dislike the party, they simply need a moment to breathe. Your response to their withdrawal will determine whether it becomes a cycle of disconnection or an opportunity for deeper understanding. Practice what I call confident patience. This means maintaining your own emotional center while giving them the space they need. Send a brief message that communicates care without demanding response, thinking of you. Here when you're ready. Then engage in activities that nurture your own well-being. This approach accomplishes several things simultaneously. It reduces the pressure they feel, which often causes them to return sooner. It demonstrates your emotional stability, which increases their sense of safety. and it prevents you from depleting your own emotional reserves through anxious pursuing. Second, become a master of incremental intimacy. Avoidant individuals are often overwhelmed by too much emotional intensity too quickly. Instead of diving into the deep end of emotional sharing, wade in slowly. Share smaller vulnerabilities before larger ones. Express appreciation for small gestures before expecting grand romantic declarations. Think of emotional intimacy like adjusting to bright light after being in darkness. It requires gradual acclimation. This doesn't mean you should suppress your authentic self or walk on emotional eggshells. Rather, it means being strategic about timing and intensity. If you want to have a serious relationship conversation, choose a moment when they're already relaxed and connected, not when they're stressed or have just returned from a period of withdrawal. Frame emotional discussions in terms of your own experience rather than their shortcomings. Instead of, "You never tell me you love me," try, "I love hearing how you feel about us." Third, learn to recognize and celebrate avoidant expressions of love. Your partner may not say, "I love you" frequently, but they might show love by remembering your preferences, solving practical problems for you, or being physically present during difficult times. They might express care through actions rather than words, consistency rather than grand gestures, loyalty rather than verbal affirmation. If you only recognize love in the language you speak, you might miss the daily novels they're writing for you in their own dialect. I remember a couple where Sarah felt unloved because Thomas rarely verbalized his feelings. Yet Thomas woke up 20 minutes early every morning to make Sarah's coffee exactly how she liked it, quietly handled household repairs without being asked, and never missed an important event in her life. When Sarah began to recognize these actions as love letters, her entire perspective shifted. She started thanking him for these daily gifts, which paradoxically made Thomas feel safe enough to begin expressing his feelings more verbally. Fourth, maintain your own emotional autonomy. This is perhaps the most crucial advice I can offer. The biggest mistake partners of avoidant individuals make is allowing their emotional well-being to become entirely dependent on their partner's level of engagement. This creates a pressure that avoidant individuals find suffocating, which triggers more withdrawal, creating a vicious cycle. Cultivate your own friendships, pursue your own interests, maintain your own emotional practices. When your avoidant partner sees that you're capable of being happy and fulfilled independently, it actually makes them feel safer to get closer. The paradox is that the less you need them, the more available they become. This isn't game playing or manipulation, it's recognizing that avoidant individuals are drawn to strength and repelled by neediness. Fifth, communicate appreciation more than criticism. The avoidant nervous system is already hypervigilant for signs of disappointment or rejection. If the majority of your communications focus on what they're not doing or not providing, you're confirming their deepest fear that they're inherently disappointing to those they love. Instead, make it a practice to notice and verbally acknowledge the things they do well, the ways they do show care, the efforts they make even if they fall short of your ideal. This doesn't mean becoming a doormat or accepting genuinely unacceptable behavior. It means choosing your battles wisely and ensuring that the emotional tone of your relationship leans toward appreciation rather than criticism. When you do need to address problematic behaviors, frame them as requests for your relationship rather than indictments of their character. The sixth strategy involves understanding the power of consistent, low-pressure presence. Avoidant individuals often have a history of relationships that were either overwhelming in their intensity or inconsistent in their availability. They learned to expect that people will either smother them or abandon them. You can slowly rewire their expectations by being consistently, reliably present without being demanding. This might look like maintaining regular contact without requiring immediate responses. It might mean being physically present without constantly trying to engage them in deep conversation. It might mean being emotionally available without making them feel guilty for not always taking advantage of that availability. You're essentially teaching their nervous system that safety and connection can coexist. Finally, practice what therapists call earned security. This means developing your own capacity for emotional regulation, clear communication, and healthy boundaries regardless of your attachment history. The most powerful thing you can do in relationship with an avoidant partner is to become securely attached yourself. This creates an emotional environment where their own healing becomes possible. Earned security involves learning to comfort yourself during times of disconnection, communicating your needs without blame or criticism, maintaining your own identity within the relationship, and responding to their behaviors from a place of understanding rather than reactivity. When you embody secure attachment, you become a healing presence in their life, demonstrating that intimate relationships can be safe and nourishing rather than threatening and depleting. As we reach the end of our exploration together, I want you to understand something profound about the nature of love itself. The love of an avoidant partner is not lesser than other forms of love, it's simply more carefully guarded. Like a rare vintage wine that's been stored in a vault, it requires the right conditions to be shared, but when it is, it's extraordinarily precious. Your avoidant partner's tendency to keep you at arm's length isn't a commentary on your worthiness of love or the depth of their feelings for you. It's a protective mechanism developed long before they met you, in response to experiences that taught them that emotional vulnerability was dangerous. Understanding this allows you to respond to their behavior with compassion rather than taking it personally, with patience rather than pressure, with wisdom rather than reactivity. The strategies we've discussed today, confident patience, incremental intimacy, recognizing their unique expressions of love, maintaining your emotional autonomy, emphasizing appreciation over criticism, providing consistent low-pressure presence, and developing your own earned security. These aren't just techniques for managing difficult behavior. They're invitations to create the kind of relationship environment where even the most defended heart might dare to open. Remember that change in attachment patterns happens slowly, through repeated experiences of safety rather than dramatic gestures or ultimatums. Your role isn't to break down their walls through force, but to demonstrate consistently that you can be trusted with their vulnerability when they're ready to share it. Some days this will feel like progress, other days like regression. Both are normal parts of the journey toward deeper intimacy. Most importantly, never lose sight of your own needs and boundaries in this process. Loving an avoidant partner requires patience and understanding, but it shouldn't require you to sacrifice your own emotional well-being or settle for less than you need to feel valued and loved in return. The goal isn't just to accommodate their attachment style, but to create a relationship where both of your needs can be met, even if they're met differently than you initially expected. The beautiful truth is that when avoidant individuals do learn to love more openly, when they do begin to trust in the safety of intimate connection, their love is often deeper and more loyal than others precisely because it was so hard-won. They become partners who truly choose you every day, not out of neediness or fear of being alone, but out of genuine appreciation for the safety and joy you bring to their carefully guarded world. So be patient with them and with yourself. Be curious rather than critical. Be consistent rather than dramatic. And above all, remember that the greatest gift you can give both yourself and your avoidant partner is your own emotional health and security. Love them in the language they can hear, but never stop speaking the language of your own needs and dreams. In that delicate balance lies the possibility of a love that honors both your hearts, guards, and all.
If you believe this video might help someone dear to you, share it with them A small gesture on your part could mean the world to a friend in need.